This episode, legal and illegal activities of DIYers. In this episode, the Handyman Pros discuss the legalities of DIY projects, what you can legally do, and projects that are potentially illegal. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition's entitled The Legal and Illegal Activities of DIYers. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy John. John, what have you been doing this week? Tell me.
Hey, Larry. Yeah. Good morning. Hey, here we are. And, this past week, as you know, I had this squirrel damage up on the side of my house, and it's been a while since I really got after it. I kind of just put like a screen over it, so they didn't get back in there, and a bunch of other stuff. But it was on the crown molding. These things ate the crown molding right off the side of my portico, a big chunk of it. So I had to get a ladder. I think it was like 20 feet up in the air, and I finally found a piece of crown molding that was pretty close to what was originally up there. It's hard to find stuff after 30 years. And, I was kind of up there on the ladder and, just thinking about, not falling off.
Yeah. Oh, how safe is this?
So it's a little dangerous. I don't like to go too high on ladders anymore, but I finally got that repair done, and it looked great. But, just being up on that ladder kind of leads into some of the things that we're going to be talking about here, and mainly codes, right?
Yeah, a lot of code. Yeah,
a lot of code stuff
about codes.
And we often talk about things that as handymen, what we do and what we don't want to do. That there's nothing that we can't do, but we don't do a lot of that for our jobs, right? We'll do it for our own place. But even at that, there are things that you don't want to do.
Right. For a numbers of reasons.
And we want to bring that to the listeners. So
yeah, we wanted to clarify it a bit, because there's some things that, they seem simple enough, right? I mean, they actually are simple enough, but you can't. And I have that famous example myself, which we'll talk about in a little while. But I mean, I got shut down on a project myself. On code violations. So, folks, we just want to qualify. We are not lawyers by any means, and so when we talk about legal and what's legal, what's illegal, it's basically this has to do with codes, mostly with building codes and things like that. And you need to check your local codes. So we want to make sure that a lot of this is very specific to the municipality you're in.
Yes.
So, John, you live in a municipality that's actually quite a bit stricter than the municipality that I live in as far as codes for building things and for doing things in your yard. As where I live, it's a little more rural, so it's a little, they kind of basically don't give a flip. Unless you have a big pile of lumber in your front yard, then they want to stop and investigate what you're doing. Anyway, we'll get into that. But so, folks, I just want everybody to understand these are just some things. Like when we talk about these items we're going to talk about, you've got to check your local municipality to find out. Now, 3 of the things we're going to talk about, we know for sure that you're going to need some kind of a permit to do them. So that we know. The 4th one is really very, very specific to your municipality. But the 4th one we'll talk about also is one that has a lot of safety issues. So therefore, maybe you need to think about whether you do it yourself or not. Anyway. What else we got going, John?
I'd like to say that there's one of the things that the precursor to this is that we all look at YouTube videos, we all listen to other podcasts and things like that, or you're looking at HGTV, and the one thing here is that everything looks easy, but if you haven't done some things ever, just don't do them. Okay.
Yes.
Even when you're looking at YouTube videos and, here's guys putting new, breakers and stuff in the electrical boxes. Folks, if you haven't done that, don't do it.
Right, right. I mean,
it's
that's kind
things
of
like
one of
that.
them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's things that you got to ask yourself. Am I really going to be feeling comfortable with doing it? So that's the kind of things that we can that we'll talk about here.
Yeah, so let's roll into that. That's a great segue into what we're talking about. So the first thing that we always say this. We say this to everything. If you're not comfortable doing it, if you've gone through and you've watched a half a dozen videos or so, or you're just not comfortable with it, that's where you start, right? Should you do it? No. Whether it's legal or illegal, be comfortable with it, right? If you're not comfortable with working with electrical at all, which is a big one, don't do it. If you're not comfortable working with plumbing, don't do it. If you're not comfortable climbing up a ladder like John and I are really not, past that 20-foot mark is about my level. Past that, I'm no. No,
yeah,
no,
no.
Just won't do it. So I'm just not comfortable. Been there, done that. Had too many close calls. Won't do it anymore. Just won't do it anymore. So that's the place to start. We did want to talk a little bit about why codes are in place, just because it's relevant to this conversation. So codes are there mostly for what, John?
Well, there's a variety of reasons why they're there, but really the main thing is safety standards. These codes aren't written down because they're not tried, and proven out. So there are certain ways and certain activities that need to be followed to be safe.
To be safe and to build a safe structure, as it were. And that's everything. People, folks, I don't know if you realize this, but home building there's an awful lot of science that goes into home building. Right down to the type of dirt you're in and what how your foundation is poured. And in different parts of the country, there's different ways to do foundations, and it's done largely as a result of soil types and things like that. There's a lot of variables that go into building, and I'm using the base level of foundation because that's something that very few people do that DIY, by the way. But you have to understand that the type of soil that you have matters. Even I'm going to use a different example, putting up a fence. And granted, there are codes about putting up fences, but they don't have anything to do with safety. That's mostly for appearance and stuff like that. They're not appearance, but it's for lot lines and things like that. But putting up a fence, if you're in sandy soil, you need to dig a deeper hole than you do if you're in clay, like we have here in Georgia. I mean, when you're in clay, you can really, if you're in real what I call real clay, like that really hard red clay, you only need to go about a foot deep. It's not moving. Trust me, it's not moving. But if you're in sand, brother, it's 2.5, 3 feet to put a fence post in, or it's going to move all over the place. That's why codes are there. So some of the codes, and when you're dealing with a foundation for your home, that's part of that safety factor because your house can fall over. John, you've seen those stories where whole apartment buildings have tipped over in China, right? Have you seen that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the other thing is that the codes are going to be different, where you live. So, for instance, if you're living in a hurricane area, you're going to have different codes.
Exactly.
For all the reasons you can think of. And
snow loading too is another one. So you and I both lived in the north, and we understand that snow gets to be pretty heavy. And so you have different that's for roofing and for wall structure, but still, these are not the things that most DIYers are doing. So we don't worry about that, but we just want to explain that we're going to bring up 4 points, 4 jobs that you pretty much need to check and see if you need a permit on. And they're things that seem to be pretty simple, but they really can be very involved. So that's part of the reason why codes are there. And let's just tease them, John. Let's just tell them. So electrical work, number one, again, if you're not comfortable with it, you better check. And there's a lot of electrical that actually needs a permit for.
Right.
Plumbing.
And if you're not comfortable, once again, if you're not comfortable doing this, then you need to hire somebody who is qualified to do it.
Who's qualified to do it, right? Plumbing is another one. We're going to talk a little bit about deck building, which seems to be very simple, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about tree removal too. Those are the 4 things. So let's start off with my favorite, deck building, which, by the way,
why don't you start? I'll start and say that, at one point, building a deck was not, it needed a lot of brain power to really put it together right. But the codes have just really tightened up on this for all the variety of reasons. Especially here, we had a bunch of bad decks being built in the Atlanta area, and they were collapsing everywhere. So they remember when they did all that, Larry,
yeah.
that
Yep.
they really have strengthened the codes on decks to the point that it's probably overbuilt now. Would you say?
I would say they're stronger than your home, according to the latest National Builders Association recommendations for decking. Yeah. But there's a very interesting study out there, John, that I actually got into, and I got into this, folks. I've told you before. I'm gonna tell you again. I got shut down on building a little addition to my deck. I literally the code guy stopped by and he put up a cease and desist on my. I was adding 10 square feet to my deck, and long story short, we put in a retaining wall and fixed it. But we'll get to that. But this is part of why it's important. But I got into doing some of the research on it, and there are actually literally thousands of deaths attributed to deck collapse in the United States over the past 10 years. I mean, thousands, not one or two. This is thousands. It's in the thousands, and the number of injuries is knocking on the 10,000 range. So it's really a serious problem, and most of the reasons for, because I forget where this report is, but if you're interested, send us an email at questions@handymanprosradioshow.com, and I'll send you, and I'll refine it and send it to you. But there's a whole long spreadsheet. It's big. It's really big because it's 50 states, and it's all the deck collapses in the 50 states and the outcomes of those collapses, meaning how many people were injured, how many people died, and there are plenty of those out there where deck collapse, no one injured, but generally decks collapse when, John? When you got a bunch of people on it.
Yeah, the loading on them, they always get overloaded. And
right.
I think that's one of the things that they really, when they strengthen these codes, was they had to take that into account, because it's like people, they always can, as many people as you can jam on a deck, that's how many people are going to be on that thing.
Well, exactly. And the point with deck building, and this is particularly appropriate to decks that are high up in the air. So the ones, of course, where there's the most injuries are the ones that are 4 feet and higher in the air, right? And so, but even on the lower ones, there's several reports on this thing where 4 feet off the ground, deck collapses, broken leg, broken arm, things like that, right? So you think, it's not very high, it doesn't matter. Well, I don't know. I didn't write the codes, but it all boils down to really shoddy building and a lack of structural engineering knowledge, right? So building a deck is really because it's a hanging structure in most cases, right? It hangs. It's not supported up underneath usually very well, right? So most decks are just basically, they're a cantilever type design where they're attached to your house on one side and they're on a post and a beam on the other side, usually, right? Almost all cases. Well, nobody thinks about that when they're having a party, right? Nobody's out there going, well, gee, I can only put 10 people on the deck, and nobody can dance, by the way. We can't jump up and down, right? Because that's the other side of it, are impacts and shock, right? So dancing causes deck collapses. I mean, most deck collapses occur when, John? When somebody's having a party is exactly what it is.
That's absolutely right, And unfortunately, I just read the other day about another collapse. It was at a wedding. So this is the kind of thing that you need to be cognizant of, with your deck. And that's not even to say the maintenance and repairs. Now, we've talked about this before, but it's always a good thing to check here. Now that we're talking about this, to check underneath your deck to make sure things are solid and they're in the places that they're supposed to be,
and not rotten as well.
Yep.
Right, and not rotten as well. And so that's the reason for this increase in the codes on decking. And literally, when I got into the codes, the codes are literally more stringent than the codes for the footers in your home. It's kind of crazy. And there's been a lot of changes. I hate to say this, there's a certain amount of industry sway over how some of these codes were written, because for example, folks, you cannot direct bury your posts anymore according to the latest codes, recommended codes. But in my municipality, you cannot bury your posts into the ground and surround them with concrete. That's not to code. you have to put them onto a fastener that is a metal fastener that's attached to the concrete in some way. It's either poured into the concrete or it's drilled in and bolted down. Now, personally, and again, I'm not questioning the codes, but personally, that's not as secure as burying a post 2 or 3 feet into the ground and surrounding it with concrete. It's just not. You can hit that post hard enough and break it off that mount. I can't do that if I bury the post into concrete 3 feet into the ground. But I know the reason that code was written, and that code was written because there was a batch of extremely bad pressure treat wood, non-ground contact pressure treat wood that people were using, and it was rotting inside the concrete, and then it would break. And I understand that, but the newest ways to attach, to me, but I have to go with what the code.
Nothing touches the ground, right?
Nothing touches the ground directly except the concrete.
Yeah, so that's our code here, folks. You need to look at your own codes and things like that. So, we've talked about this before. Now that's kind of building a brand new deck, but like you had experienced, even if you're adding on a little bit of a deck and it's touching the old deck,
correct.
everything needs to come up to the current code,
everything.
Right? That's what the nice gentleman told you, right?
That's what the nice gentleman told me. He said everything you're doing needs to come up to code if you're going to add this on. So my little deck job went from 1,500 to 33,000. That's that was the number, the differential. And at that point, I could have left the old deck and not added the new part of the deck. It's a long story. Anyway, I think I've told it once before. So
yes,
so
we've been through this. So, folks, you can go back and listen to that episode. Of maintaining your deck, and sometimes you can touch things that you don't want to touch because it's code, and if you get caught, then it can
send you down a spiral you don't want to go.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. So that's one job that if you're going to build a whole new deck, and I think that some places, if the deck is lower than what you said, Larry, I think 4 feet. If it's 3 feet or lower, you don't need a permit. I don't know. There's some things, but everybody needs to look that up.
So, John, where do they look that up, by the way?
I will tell you that I often struggle with finding the exact current codes. I would Google it. And look online. You can go down to your municipality and see if you can get the codes from them. Yeah, generally you need to go to your municipality. They have a planning. It's usually in the planning department. They know they have the codes. And today, I guess it depends on the nature of your municipality. But my municipality actually posts the codes online. Now, it's like reading a typical legal document. It's really involved, Right. But at least the basics are there. And generally you can find a synopsis of it someplace online. So that's where you go look. You go down to your planning department in your local municipality, city, town, county, whatever, whoever's in charge of all that. And that's where you can find that information. And this is true for any of your codes. So you need to know that. You need to know that that's where you get that information. So anyway, and that's for all these codes. The next things. Let's talk about electrical, John. Well, this is one that we all experience. A lot of people are uncomfortable with doing electrical work. Okay, and for good reason. I will say that if you are that person, don't perform electrical work, and there's certain electrical work that you should not do anyways. And you should call in somebody who's qualified to do that work. So, it's more than just rewiring a socket here or there. But when you're talking about the electrical panels in your home, and even running a lot of new lights and things like that, if you're not comfortable, don't do it. Hire a professional to come out and do it. This is a job that, I will do. Larry, you and I both are in agreement, is that we'll do up to a point of electrical work in other people's homes. And then I'll walk away from, the comprehensive stuff. Correct. Yeah. Same thing here. Because it's just, I'm not the licensed electrician. I know my limitations. and I understand the codes, and that I'm not going to pull a permit for certain for this. We don't do that anyways, right? So.
Well, we also don't do much electrical work, so
right. Well, it's one of those things where if you don't do it properly, you're going to set yourself up for either a current issue
or a future
no pun
issue.
Intended.
Yeah.
No,
but
that's right. a future issue of fire.
Yeah, fire is the biggest
or
risk.
Shock. It's
shock
just
and
it's
fire.
one of those. It's one of those things. So, for a lot of the smaller electrical work, I do all of it, but I won't do it in other folks places. That's just not. It's just not what I'm doing.
And to give you some clarity out there, folks, one of the things like changing out a fan or something is not something that generally needs a permit. We're not talking about that. We're talking about like placing a new outlet or running something that's usually what takes it. But if the wire already exists there and you're swapping out a fan, just make sure the power's off. Get a non-contact tester and a contact tester and all that stuff, and just check it. If the power's off, the power's off. It's really that simple. We're not talking about that kind of thing. We're talking about more of adding a line or essentially. I don't do anything 220 at all, nothing, because it's just not. I'm not comfortable with it. It's not in my bailiwick. And I don't get into boxes as a general rule. I just don't. I won't for money, I guarantee. But even on myself, I don't generally get into the box. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. So it just carries too much liability. It's just something. Let a guy that does it all the time. If he comes to your door and his hair's standing up, he's probably good.
Yeah. Right. One of the things is, and it comes to mind, is that if the folks out there, if you're building out a basement and you're running your own electrical wires and things like that, number one, you probably should be getting a permit for building out a basement, and you really need to get that electrical work inspected before you close up the walls.
Yep.
So it's one of these things. I mean, we can go on and on here about all this,
but we're not going to.
The bottom line is that there are certain things that you can do, you might feel comfortable doing, and there's other things that it's either that you're uncomfortable or you're not qualified to do. So just kind of know your limitations, especially in the electrical world.
Yeah. Don't be like John.
It's not very forgiving.
Don't be like John and take that metal chair and tie the electrodes to it and then plug it into the 220 socket.
Yeah,
oh, wait.
Right.
Never mind.
Right. Yeah.
All right, let's talk.
Lean aluminum ladder up against the high tension lines.
Yeah, the service to your house. Yeah, right. I don't know why it rubbed off the metal. Anyway, geez, that's not even funny. Plumbing is another one. Generally, you're going to need some kind of a permit for. And it's sometimes, folks, it's simple things like changing out a hot water heater. If you have an electric hot water heater or a gas hot water heater, I guess it doesn't really matter, but you're probably going to need a permit to do a hot water heater. As a general rule, that's the true thing. Plumbing is kind of one of those things that, for me, I mean, it's up for debate, really. Plumbing, with the current technologies of how we're doing plumbing with PEX and some of the connectors and things, I'm not so sure that plumbing codes are great, but I think it's mostly on the drain side that they're worried. And then sewer and septic also is another thing. Definitely let your professionals do that, because if you do it wrong, if you don't know what you're doing in a sewer and septic system, you literally have a shitty problem. I mean, it's all over the place. So I'm going to tell you, just have the professionals do that, like literally.
One of the things about plumbing is there's a lot of codes. There's a lot of codes there in plumbing that you're probably not aware of, right? And so, if you're doing things, I mean, even small things. Sometimes in some municipalities, even just removing a toilet takes a licensed plumber.
Yes, it does, and that's particularly that's noticeable in Florida.
You're supposed to have a licensed plumber to do that. Even you need to get a permit even to put in another drain with a P-trap.
Yep.
In some municipalities.
Yep.
So it's these kind of things that's like, well, wait a minute, I can just add. I'm just going to put in a wash tub, in my basement, but that requires a P-trap. And you need to move both supply and the lines going out of that thing, right? So that's that's actually in a lot of places a permit thing, or it takes a licensed plumber to do that.
Right.
It's these kind of things that you just need to be aware of.
Yeah. So, folks, one other question, too. Both John and I consider natural gas and or propane. If you have to run a natural gas or a propane line, that is generally that we call that a plumbing job, because in 9 out of 10 times it really is a plumbing job. But I'm going to tell you, have somebody that knows have a professional do that. That's just not, don't take that chance, because that's a boom boom.
Yeah, right.
You flood your house with natural gas because you have a pinhole leak, and the next thing you know, you've got an explosive situation.
Yeah.
Literally it'll blow your house up. And when somebody that knows what they're doing when they do it, they actually take nitrogen and they run a high pressure into that, like about 200 psi. And natural gas and propane run at about 50 to 60 psi. So when they put 200 psi in there, if it doesn't leak, it doesn't leak. But if you don't have access to that kind of high pressure, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's crazy, because you will. It's just crazy. It's really dangerous. So anyway, what about trees, Johnny? You live in Milton, Milton, Georgia.
When I was younger, when I was younger, I used to take the trees down. And where I live, it's all wooded, and I used to get out there with the chainsaw, and drop a bunch of trees. And then as I got older, I was like, boy, that's dumb. A seemingly small tree turns into a very big tree as it's going over.
Yes.
That's been my experience. So I had some, trees that weren't that big, and then I got about halfway through that thing with a chainsaw, I'm going through and I hear it cracking. I'm like,
I'm committed now.
Yeah, there is a lot of weight coming down here and a lot of moment coming down here. And so it's got to, you have to be thinking about that. So since
those are safety issues,
Yeah.
So
ever since then, I, will hire that out. Now, I will say that where I live is they are very strict on taking down trees.
Yes.
Speaking of codes,
yes,
okay.
This is code.
And they want all the reasons why you're taking down trees and things like that. Now, there's ways around it, okay. But the point being is that legally, in my municipality, they're very strict on taking down trees. So you need to be aware of what those are. It's not just you go out and chop things down. Now, you live, let's say even especially on the lake, right? You can't just go out and chop trees down. So
folks, I butt up against Corps. It's called the Corps of Engineers actually owns the property on the lake. I live on Lake Lanier in North Georgia, and the Corps of Engineers owns the property that borders the whole lake. So we have a permit to use the property that's in front of our home for a dock and for things like that. But my home is a beautiful example of really having to understand how the codes work. Most of my property sits in Forsyth County, Georgia. Forsyth I'm not in the city of Cumming. I'm in Forsyth County alone. And in Forsyth County, I can cut down any tree I want. Makes no difference, right? I can cut down trees. The county doesn't care. Whatever. It's your property. You can cut down any trees you want. Where my property touches the core line, now I have to get approval to cut the grass or cut down weeds or cut down any trees. And they will come out literally and inspect what trees we want to take down, and then they need to know why. And then it even gets crazier than that. Most of the time, we're not allowed to remove the trees. So we can drop the trees, but we can't cut them up and take them out, because that's what the Corps rules determine. And if we do that, we can forfeit our dock permit, which is not a good thing to do on Lake Lanier, Georgia. Trust me. And so anyway, you have to be really, really aware. Now, and mine's an interesting property. I work under two separate actually, I don't own the property on the core, but as it butts up against my property, I have to abide by two separate sets of municipal rules. One's not municipal; it's Corps of Engineers. But anyway, there's two separate sets of rules, and This is unique in most places. I would say it's pretty unique. But I do know places like where John lives in Milton, Georgia. They're very, very much into like preserving trees. I know if you go down like into Brookhaven, Georgia, which is a suburb north of Atlanta, that's inside the perimeter in Atlanta, and they're very, very much into protecting trees. Another thing that you have to be aware of is that some municipalities consider some trees to be historic. So if it's a historic tree that you have on your property, probably one of the most famous historic trees was what they call it at Augusta, John? It was the Eisenhower pine tree, or something like that. It finally died and fell over.
Yeah, as a loblolly.
But it was. There are trees out there.
They finally took that thing out of there.
Well, they had to. It fell over. It actually fell over.
Yeah, right.
So it finally came down. But there are trees all over. These are known trees. You touch that tree. There are some trees. If you cut them, you're going to jail. I think if you went out and cut the Eisenhower pine, they'd probably prosecute you there. Yeah. But anyway, it's very, very subjective to the municipalities. It's very, very subjective. So if you want to take out trees, make sure you know. Just don't assume you can go out and cut a tree, because you can't assume that in anything. And a good arborist will do it. So kind of a combination of it's dangerous unless you really know what you're doing, and or be aware that sometimes it's illegal to cut trees in your particular municipalities.
Yeah, and that is one that kind of is a weird, a lot of people that move in here don't understand that. So they're out there and they're cutting trees, and, the next thing you know, you got the nice gentleman pulling up in a car,
and they're not really friendly about that stuff.
And they start off friendly. And,
hey, what are you doing?
Hey,
are you aware of? Here's your fine.
So, it's one of those things that it really does surprise a lot of people that, what you can and you can't do with the trees. So you just have to, this is just another example of, before you do anything, you kind of have to stop, well, at least I do. It's like you stop and think, I look around, should I be doing this? For all the reasons that we discussed here, So.
Well, I am going to say that hydroponic laboratory that you have in your basement, that you have those plants growing in, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, that's my basement.
Speaking of that, I got to turn those lights on.
There you go. It's perfect. Well, Johnny.
More grow bulbs, Larry.
Wait a minute, Johnny. Didn't you get those special lights from the spaceship the last time it landed? Isn't that what happened?
I did. I took them off the spaceship.
You were taking that station apart, and you took the lights off of it because they had that special grow light in there? I knew it, Johnny. I knew it. So, all right, folks, if you enjoy the Handyman Pros radio show, please tell your friends and neighbors. We would really appreciate it. We find that word of mouth can be some of the best promotion that we have. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate. Send us an email, questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. You can join us, our Facebook group at Handyman Pros, or you can follow us on Twitter at Handyman Radio. Once again, we want to thank you for listening, and we will see you next week on the Handyman Pros radio show.